Welcome to Moonlight Mysteries, a calm space for long, research-rich mysteries. If you enjoy these sleepy deep dives, please like this video, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss new episodes. If you'd like to support the channel, a quick comment with your favorite moment helps more people find us. Now settle in, dim the lights, and let's begin. Baalbek, Chapter 1, Introduction. In the fertile Bekaa Valley of eastern Lebanon stand the awe-inspiring ruins of Baalbek, known to the Romans as Heliopolis, or the City of the Sun. Here, a monumental 2,000-year-old temple complex dedicated to Jupiter sits atop some of the largest building stones ever used in antiquity. Megaliths weighing up to an astonishing 1,000 tons each, dwarfing even the stones of Stonehenge. In fact, archaeologists recently uncovered an even larger monolith at Baalbek's ancient quarry, estimated at 1,650 tons, possibly the heaviest block ever cut by human hands. Such mind-boggling scale has made Baalbek one of the world's most mysterious ancient sites, prompting centuries of speculation about who built it, how, and why. Located between the snow-capped peaks of Mount Lebanon and the Anti-Lebanon Range, Baalbek has been a sacred place for millennia. Even its name hints at ancient roots. Scholars debate the origin. Some argue Baalbek means Lord Baal of the Bekaa Valley, while others contend it combines Baal meaning Lord or the god of Baal with Bek, a word for town or citadel, essentially City of Baal. This latter interpretation aligns with the fact that when the Greek took control in the Hellenistic era, they simply translated the name to Heliopolis, meaning City of the Sun, equating the local Semitic sun storm god Baal with their own sun god Helios. The continuity of the name suggests an enduring cultic significance. Long before the Romans arrived, Baalbek was likely a focal point of worship for the Canaanite and Phoenician deity Baal-Hadad, lord of storms and fertility. Ancient legend even held that Baalbek was the birthplace of Baal himself, underscoring its perceived sanctity in the regional folklore. As a crossroads of civilizations, Baalbek's history is rich and complex. Over thousands of years, it would be shaped and reshaped by Phoenician priests, Hellenistic kings, Roman emperors, Byzantine bishops, Islamic caliphs, and Ottoman governors. Each left their mark on its temples and stones. In modern times, this once forgotten site has been dramatically rediscovered and studied. Early modern travelers in the 16th century were stunned by the colossal ruins overtaken by weeds. Later, armies and empires fought over it. Earthquakes toppled its towering columns, and archaeologists from Europe and Lebanon excavated and restored its fallen grandeur. Today, Baalbek is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a treasure of human heritage, yet it remains shrouded in enigmas. How did ancient builders move blocks weighing over 1,000 tons without modern machinery? Why did they undertake such an unnecessarily large construction project? as even scholars admit the stones are larger than strictly needed. In the absence of clear historical records, a very accommodating screen of speculation has been projected onto Baalbek. Over the years, countless theories have arisen, some grounded in archaeology, others veering into myth and the fantastical, attempting to explain Baalbek's megalithic marvels. In this episode, we will deep dive into Baalbek's story. First, we will travel through its long history, from its shadowy prehistoric origins and flourishing under Rome's rule, through its transformation in late antiquity and the Middle Ages, up to modern archaeological investigations using cutting-edge technology. We will then examine the many theories that have been proposed to explain Baalbek's gigantic stones and enigmatic pasts. These theories span the spectrum from mainstream to fringe. We'll see what scholars say about ingenious Roman engineering, but also explore alternative ideas that perhaps Phoenicians or other lost civilizations began the work, that giants or Nephilims from biblical lore built the foundations before the flood, that King Solomon's Jinn erected the stones as a palace for the Queen of Sheba, that ancient aliens used Baalbek as a landing pad, or that a lost advanced civilization with high technology achieved these feats. Throughout, we'll integrate architectural, historical, and mythological context from every era of Baalbek's existence, from Canaanite times to the Hellenistic and Roman zeniths, and from the Islamic medieval period to the present day, to separate fact from fiction as much as possible. Baalbek's tale is one of splendor and mystery. By the end of our journey, we will better appreciate why Baalbek's ruins, unexcelled in size and elegance even by the monument in Rome itself, have fired the imagination of generations. And while some questions may remain unanswered, the process of investigating them reveal a fascinating tapestry of ancient ingenuity, cultural continuity, and human wonder. Now, let us begin with what history and archaeology tell us about Baalbek's origin and development. Chapter 2: Historical Background. Origins and Early Cultic Significance. According to local lore and legend, Baalbek is extraordinarily ancient, one of the world's earliest cities, as one Arab chronicler claimed. Tradition held that its very founding reached back into the midst of time, even to the dawn of humanity. The Maronite Christian patriarch Esfand Dawi, writing in the 17th century, recorded a striking legend. The fortress of Baalbek is the most ancient building in the world. Cain, the son of Adam, built it in the year 133 of the creation. During a fit of raving madness, he gave it the name of his son Enoch and peopled it with giants who were punished for their iniquities by the flood. This tale, placing Baalbek's creation long before Noah's flood, is of course a mythic narrative rather than literal history. Yet it strongly suggests that people of the region believed Baalbek to be an immemorial sacred place, existing since before the memory of man. What does actual history say about Baalbek's earliest years? Thus far, Archaeology has found scant concrete evidence of monumental construction at Baalbek before the Hellenistic or Greek period. The enormous Roman temples sit atop a high mound, indicating successive layers of human occupation. But whatever structures once stood there in the Bronze or Iron Ages have left little trace above ground. Not a trace has been found of the original temple of Baal that must have stood on the same site, wrote one scholar plainly. If an early Canaanite or Phoenician shrine existed, it was likely dismantled or buried completely by later builders. Nonetheless, historians infer that Baalbek was indeed a sacred sanctuary in antiquity, even before Alexander the Great's time. The very name Baalbek points to devotion to Baal, a Western Semitic deity of storms, fertility, and the sun, who was widely worshipped across the Levant. The ancient Greeks who encountered the site identify Baal with Helios, the sun, or with Zeus, or Jupiter, due to his sky and thunder attributes. Roman sources later refer to the chief god of Heliopolis as Jupiter Optimus Maximus Heliopolitanus, essentially Jupiter merged with Baal in aspects of Helios. All of this implies an unbroken thread of religious significance. A temple of Baal-Hadad likely stood at Baalbek in the Canaanite Phoenician era, which was then syncretized with Greco-Roman religion when new rulers took over. Indeed, some evidence hints at pre-Hellenistic religious use. Fragments of earlier cultures have been found in the vicinity. Artifacts from the Bronze Age and even Neolithic period have been discovered around Baalbek, showing the area was inhabited long before classical times. One account, drawing on local folklore and perhaps some archaeology, suggests that by the late 2nd millennium BCE, well over 3,000 years ago, there was a walled precinct with a raised platform and twin tower gateway at Baalbek, centered on a vertical shaft in the bedrock used as a sacrificial pit. While the details remain unconfirmed, this paints a picture of Baalbek as a long-standing cult center, evolving through the ages. Additionally, the Phoenicians likely venerated a Heliopolitan triad of deities here, typically a father god, Baal, a mother or consort, often Astartes, and a young divine son, such as Adon. Later on, the Romans explicitly linked this triad to Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury, indicating the persistence of the trio of gods. In short, Baalbek's sanctity predates the Romans. It was probably a holy site of the Lord of the Baca Valley for centuries, even if the magnificent stone temples visible today are of later construction. Historically, Baalbek first enters the mainstream record with Alexander the Great. In 334 BCE, during Alexander's epic campaign against the Persian Empire, he conquered the region of Phoenicia and Cilicia. According to later chroniclers, Alexander passed through Baalbek, then an existing town or sacred place, after his victory in Egypt, on his way to the decisive battle of Gaugamela against King Darius. Recognizing its strategic and religious importance, Alexander or his successors established a Hellenistic colony there. The city was officially renamed Heliopolis by the Greeks, a direct translation of Baalbek to reflect the solar cult. after Alexander's death. His generals divided the Near East, and Heliopolis Baalbek became a prize contested by the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt and the Seleucid kingdom of Syria. For much of the 3rd and early 2nd century BCE, Baalbek was under the Ptolemies, who may have begun monumental works on the site. In fact, archaeologists believe the earliest phases of the massive platform, the stone terrace on which the Great Temple later stood, might have been initiated under Ptolemaic rule in the 3rd century BCE. Though the evidence is circumstantial, it would make sense. The Ptolemies were known to patronize indigenous cults, as they did in Egypt, and building a grand foundation for a temple of the sun god would align with their policy of legitimizing their rule through local religious traditions. By 200 BCE, control shifted to the Seleucid dynasty. One theory posits that a Seleucid temple project was underway at Heliopolis in the late 2nd century BCE. There is a hint in the historical record that around 150 to 100 BCE, a Seleucid priesthood may have been involved in constructing an open-air temple or altar on the site. Some later writers even mention that Antiochus V Epiphanes, a Seleucid king known for grand building projects, had a hand in Heliopolis, though concrete evidence is lacking. What we do know is that by the time the Roman Republic encroached on this region, Baalbek, or Heliopolis, was an established city with a noted sanctuary. In 64 to 63 BCE, the Roman general Pompey marched through Syria, annexing it to the Republic. Baalbek fell to the Romans around 63 BCE without significant resistance. The Romans, recognizing the site's religious prestige among the locals, wisely embraced it. They restored the Semitic name Baalbek in everyday use, even as official Latin and Greek texts still called it Heliopolis. And more importantly, they patronized the local gods. Rome had a policy of co-opting native deities into their pantheon as a means of securing loyalty. Thus, Baal-Hadad was formally identified with Jupiter, Astartes with Venus, and a young god, perhaps a form of Adonis with Mercury. The Roman effectively said, "Your Baal is now our Jupiter, and we will build him the grandest temple of the East," a temple that not only honors the god, but also showcases Roman imperial might. The Roman Heliopolis, City of the Sun. Under Roman rule, Baalbek entered its golden age. Over the span of about 2 centuries, the largest temple complex in the entire Roman world was constructed there. The scale and lavishness of the project were unprecedented, an extravagant declaration of Rome's wealth, engineering prowess, and respect for the region's ancient faith. Yet interestingly, Roman historians left almost no direct accounts of the construction. Not a single Latin inscription at the site names the architect or the emperor responsible. This silence has puzzled scholars and contributed to later legends that the temples must be the work of beings greater than mortals. Still, we can piece together the timeline and contributors from a combination of archaeological evidence and a few later writings. Construction began around the start of the Roman imperial period, soon after the Roman annexation. A plausible scenario is that Julius Caesar in the 40s BCE, or the Emperor Augustus, who reigned from 27 BCE to 14 CE, initiated the building of a grand new temple to Jupiter at Heliopolis. One ancient source notes that around 15 BCE, roughly when Augustus organized the new province of Syria, work was already underway. The main temple of Jupiter likely started around the time or a bit later, possibly by about 27 to 25 BCE, when Augustus was restructuring Eastern cults, or under his successor. Another source suggests actual construction of the temple superstructure started around 60 BCE under late Republican or early Augustan oversight, which might conflict slightly with Pompey's timeline, but it could refer to platform work begun under the last Seleucid or local Roman client rulers. In any case, by the mid-1st century CE, the cult at Heliopolis was flourishing. It's said that Emperor Nero ruled 54 to 68 CE, saw the temple largely completed during his reign. If true, that means the temple of Jupiter proper, including its towering colonnade, was finished by the 60s CE. At its height, this temple of Jupiter was immense, a truly colossal Corinthian temple, raised on a high platform and surrounded by 54 columns of granite and limestone, each column over 20 meters, 66 feet tall, and nearly 2.5 meters or 8 feet in diameter. For comparison, these were among the tallest columns of the classical world, taller even than those of the Roman Pantheon. The temple's podium was reached by an ornate stairway and preceded by courtyards and gateways that would be added over the next century and a half. Several emperors contributed to expanding the complex in stages. The Emperor Antonius Pius reigned 138 to 161 CE, is credited with building the Great Courtyard, also known as the Grand Court, in front of the Jupiter Temple. This courtyard was enormous, about 134 meters by 112 meters, enclosed by peristyle colonnades and filled with altars and probably statues. It may have been Antonius Pius who formally inaugurated the completed Jupiter Temple by funding this forecourt and holding grand ceremonies, an event so impressive that later chroniclers like John Megaliths mistakenly credited Antonius as builder of all Heliopolis. Subsequently, the Severan dynasty made its mark. Septimius Severus, 193 to 211 CE, and his son Caracalla, 211 to 217 CE, added the monumental propylaea, the grand entrance gateway, along with its massive staircase, in the hexagonal court that linked the Great Court to the propylaea. The hexagonal court is a unique feature, an intermediate six-sided forecourt that softened the transition from the rectangular Great Court to the steps. This was likely finished by the 220 CE. Finally, in the mid-3rd century, Philip the Arab, 244 to 249 CE, is thought to have completed or refurbished the hexagonal forecourt and perhaps other remaining elements. By around 250 CE, The temple complex as a whole was essentially complete, a sprawling axial arrangement from the propylaea in grand stairs through the hexagon to the great court with its sacrificial altars and towering twin altars, and culminating in the raised temple of Jupiter at the far end. At the same time, other temples were built on the site as well, notably the Temple of Bacchus, or possibly Mercury, was constructed just a short distance from the main Jupiter temple, probably around 150 to 200 CE. Its exact date is debated, but stylistically, it fits the mid-2nd century. The Temple of Bacchus is smaller than Jupiter's, but still enormous. Its interior cella is richly decorated with exquisite reliefs. The irony is that while named for Bacchus in modern times due to decorative motifs like grapes, it may actually have been dedicated to the younger god of the Heliopolitan triad, perhaps a form of Adonis or to Mercury. Regardless, it stands as one of the best preserved Roman temples in the world today. Additionally, there was a temple of Venus, or Aphrodite, built near the complex, distinctive for its round shape and scalloped wall design. Likely constructed in the early 3rd century CE to honor the goddess equivalent to the local Atargatis. A 4th temple to Mercury sat on a hill, Shaikh Abdallah Hill, overlooking the city. It required a long staircase of 100 steps to reach and served as a kind of high place of worship. Only scant ruins of this remains now. The religious practices at Roman Heliopolis combined Eastern and Western elements. We know from the writing of Macrobius and others that the cult statue of Jupiter Heliopolitanus was quite unlike the bearded Jupiter of Rome. It was a syncretic idol, a gilded figure of a young, beardless god, holding a whip in his raised right hand, like a charioteer, and a lightning bolt in grain ears in his left. It was flanked by bulls, sacred to Hadad, and adorned with sun and moon symbols. Worshippers did not enter the cella. Instead, rituals took place in the open court. Towering altars in the great court, accessible by stairways, allowed priests and devotees to ascend and perform sacrifices under the open sky. This was a distinctly Semitic practice, reminiscent of Old Testament descriptions of high places or altars of incense. The layout of the temple complex thus reflects a fusion. The architectural form were Greco-Roman, but the mode of worship had Near Eastern roots. Baalbek's oracle was famed. It was consulted by emperors. One anecdote says that in 114 CE, Trajan received a prophecy at Heliopolis that he would not return alive from his Parthian campaign. The priests carried the deity's idol in a litter and divined answers from the direction it chose to move, a practice parallel to Syrian oracles and far from Roman tradition. By the late 3rd century, Heliopolis was at its zenith, a thriving city and pilgrimage site. It even achieved the status of a Roman colonia, with the Jew Italicum, a mark of prestige granting self-governance and tax exemptions, under Emperor Septimius Severus. Coins minted at Heliopolis show the temples and give hints to dates. For instance, coins of Severus and Caracalla depict a temple facade confirming their involvement. With its fertile surrounding lands and strategic location on the trade route between the coast, Beirut, and the interior, Damascus, the city prospered. Late antiquity from pagan temple to Byzantine church. The triumph of Christianity in the Roman Empire during the 4th century dramatically impacted Baalbek. As the empire's religion changed, pagan cult centers were progressively shut down or repurposed. The once mighty sanctuaries of Jupiter Baal at Heliopolis were no exception. Sometime in the late 300 CE, likely around 379 to 380 CE, Emperor Theodosius I issued edicts closing many pagan temples, and Heliopolis's cult would have been suppressed around then. The final recorded oracle at Baalbek dates to the reign of Emperor Julian, who briefly attempted to restore pagan worship between 361 and 363 CE. Julian visited, or at least favored, Heliopolis, reopening the temples and resuming sacrifices. But after Julian's death in 363, the return to paganism was short-lived. Later, under Christian emperors, the Temple of Jupiter was definitively closed. The magnificent sanctuary did not sit idle for long. The Byzantines converted portions of the complex into a Christian basilica. According to historical sources, Theodosius II, emperor from 402 to 450 CE, ordered the construction of a large basilica church within the vast courtyard of the temple complex. It appears that stones from the smaller temples or outer walls were reused to build a basilica in the Great Court, likely dedicated to Saint Mary, the Mother of God. The shape of the hexagonal forecourt may have even lent itself to a domed rotunda, possibly intended to mimic Jerusalem's Holy Sepulchre, which had an atrium and rotunda combination. Then came a disaster that sealed the fate of the old Temple of Jupiter. Around 524 or 525 CE, a massive lightning bolt struck the temple and ignited a fire, causing extensive destruction. Ironically, the temple of a storm god was largely felled by a lightning strike. It's likely that the roof and parts of the structure collapsed. Whether by design or by this accident of nature, the great temple ceased to function except as a quarry for the new church. By the late 6th century, a Christian chronicler, Michael the Syrian, claimed that a statue of Jupiter was somehow still standing in the 570s, but this is almost certainly erroneous. By then, Justinians had carried off the temple's columns. Emperor Justinian, 527 to 565 CE, famously ordered several of Baalbek's huge columns to be removed and shipped to Constantinople to adorn his new Hagia Sophia Cathedral. 8 pink granite columns from Heliopolis were transported by sea for this purpose, a logistical feat in its own right, given each weighted perhaps 60 tons. This suggests that the temple ruins was now seen as a convenient source of luxury building materials. The removal of columns may have further destabilized the remaining structure. The once grand temple of Jupiter was likely now a picturesque ruin, its altar, perhaps converted to Christian use, in its courtyards containing a church amid the rubble. By the time of the Arab conquest in the 7th century, Heliopolis Baalbek was largely a Byzantine garrison town with a significant ecclesiastic presence. Muslim armies under the Rashidun Caliphate took Baalbek around 636 to 637 CE during their sweep through Syria. Early Islamic historians mention that Baalbek capitulated peacefully after the fall of Damascus, which spared it the destruction that beset some other cities. The new Arab rulers, impressed by the Cyclopean ruins, called it Qalat Baalbek, the fortress of Baalbek. During the Umayyad period, 7th to 8th century, Baalbek continued to be inhabited. Some modifications were likely made. Possibly one of the Roman temples, perhaps the smaller Venus temple, was converted into a mosque, as happened in Damascus and Palmyra, but details are sparse. What is known is that Baalbek's formidable stone walls were indeed incorporated into an actual fortress over time. The Abbasid caliphs and later local dynasties used Baalbek as a military stronghold, guarding the Bekaa Valley approach. Medieval fortresses, invasions, and survival. Throughout the Middle Ages, Baalbek remained an important fortified city, though it was buffeted by warfare and natural disasters. In the 12th century, during the era of the Crusades, Baalbek was controlled by various Muslim rulers of Syria who vied with Crusader forces. In 1110, the emir of Damascus, Tuktakin, besieged Baalbek upon hearing it might ally with Crusaders, ultimately forcing its surrender. A few decades later, in 1139, 1157, and 1170, devastating earthquakes struck the region, collapsing buildings and killing thousands in Baalbek. Amid this upheaval, the city changed hands. The Zingid, notably Imad ad-Din Zingi of Aleppo in 1136, and later Saladin's Ayyubid held it. Saladin granted Baalbek to one of its general as a fief, and they rebuilt the citadel walls using the ancient stones. In 1260, the Mongol hordes, led by Hulagu Khan, swept through, reportedly sacking Baalbek and slaughtering its inhabitants. Mongol invasions and internal conflicts left Baalbek depopulated until the Mamluk Sultan Kalawan resettled and refortified it in the late 13th century. Then another catastrophe. Around 1320, heavy floods washed through the town, causing great damage. And in 1400, the conquering warlord Tamerlane, or Timur, ravaged Baalbek yet again during his campaign in Syria, leaving it wiped out. It is a testament to the resilience of the site that Baalbek repeatedly rose from its ashes. The Arabic name Baalbek itself remained in use. and travelers continue to marvel at the columns of Solomon standing amidst the ruins. In fact, by about a century after Tamerlane, roughly the early 1500s, a local Arab writer described Baalbek as recovered and bustling, a city possessing a strong fortress with columns erected by Solomon, mosques, schools, fine streets, baths, gardens. The mention of columns erected by Solomon is telling. Medieval Islamic tradition often attributed grand ancient works to the biblical King Solomon, famed for commanding demons and jinns to build his projects. Here it implies the enormous columns, likely the 6 remaining of Jupiter's temple, were so impressive that people believed only Solomon's supernatural aid could have raised them. This shows how the memory of Baalbek's true origin had faded locally, giving way to legend, even as the site was still in use. Under the Ottoman Empire, 16th to 19th century, Baalbek became a quiet provincial town, its fortress occasionally garrisoned. European travelers in this period began to visit and document the ruins as part of the emerging fascination with antiquities. In the mid-16th century, Pierre Bellon and later Jean de la Roque were among the first Western travelers to publish descriptions. By the 18th century, Baalbek's majestic ruins had captured the European imagination. In 1751, the English architect Robert Wood visited and produced detailed drawings and accounts of Baalbek, published as The Ruins of Baalbek in 1757, spreading its fame across Europe. These accounts describe that at that time 9 giant columns of the Great Temple were still standing, many with architraves connecting them. Then, nature struck again. The Great Earthquake of 1759. In November of that year, a massive quake, estimated around magnitude 7 plus on the modern scale, hit the Levant. Baalbek was heavily affected. Most of the houses and ramparts within Baalbek were completely destroyed. Critically, the jolt brought down 3 of the 9 standing columns of the Temple of Jupiter. Observers note that since then, only 6 columns remain upright, the same 6 we see today. These 6 survived not only that quake, but also another strong tremor in 1956. The fallen columns in the architrave blocks from 1759 still lie where they crashed, adding to the tumbled stone landscape. In the 19th century, with the region under firmer Ottoman control and easier access for foreigners, archaeological interest in Baalbek grew. Empirical studies began to supplement travelogues. Notably, in 1898, the German Kaiser Wilhelm II visited Baalbek during a tour of the Middle East, after his famous visit to Damascus and Jerusalem. Struck by the magnificence of the ruin, Wilhelm obtained permission from the Ottoman Sultan to conduct full-scale excavation at Baalbek. The resulting German archaeological mission, led by Otto Puschstein, Heinrich Kohl, and Daniel Kreinker, among others, arrived in 1900 to 1901 and worked at Baalbek for 4 years with a team of about 12 scientists and 400 local laborers. They cleared debris, systematically surveyed the structures, and made meticulous drawings and photographs. The German mission uncovered the buried vaulted substructures of the Great Court and platform, answering how the vast terrace was supported by rows of massive arched vaults. They also discovered the underground service tunnels, stairwells, and a small shrine in the podium. Their work, published in a multi-volume series in subsequent years, laid the foundation for scholarly understanding of Baalbek's complex layout. One curious find around that time was the statue of a deity, reused as a building stone in a nearby village church. The Germans relocated it to a museum, underscoring how artifacts had been repurposed over centuries. Modern era, archaeology, preservation, and new discoveries. In the 20th century, Baalbek came under the French mandate after World War I, then the independent state of Lebanon after 1943. Throughout this time, conservation and research continued intermittently. French engineers in the 1920s carried out some anastylosis, re-erection of fallen pieces in the Temple of Bacchus, and cleared the hexagonal court. Baalbek became a centerpiece of Lebanese cultural heritage, and thankfully, it was spared major damage during most of the country's tumultuous events. It was officially inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1984, recognizing its outstanding universal value. In recent decades, archaeologists and preservationists have embraced modern technology to study and safeguard Baalbek. For example, following periods of conflict, notably the Lebanese Civil War from 1975 to 1990, and clashes in the region like a brief 2006 war, there was concern about structural stability and potential damage. In 2009 to 2010, a project financed by UNESCO and coordinated with the German Archaeological Institute and Lebanese experts undertook extensive 3D laser scanning and photogrammetry of the entire site. This high-resolution digital recording created a permanent record of every column drum, carving, and stone, a basis for risk assessment in future restoration. The team, led by specialists from Lebanon, Belgium, and Taiwan, scanned the ruins to millimeter accuracy, producing interactive 3D models. This was part of a risk preparedness strategy to mitigate threats like earthquakes or warfare by having precise documentation of the structure's conditions. Regular monitoring using laser scans can now detect even slight shifts or cracks over time. In addition, archaeologists have employed ground-penetrating radar and other geophysical methods to probe Baalbek's subsurface. Such surveys can locate buried walls, foundations, or cavities without excavation. While results have not been widely publicized, ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry have been used around the Great Court and the quarry area, helping to map the extent of ancient underground galleries and maybe identifying spots where future digs might reveal older layers. In a few instances, test trenches have found remains of pre-Roman occupations. For example, potsherds or column bases of earlier date. But systematic deep excavation under the Roman layer is difficult, as it would require disturbing the standing ruins, which are themselves precious. One of the most startling discoveries came in 2014, thanks to a combination of archaeological institution and perhaps a bit of technology. For centuries, visitors to Baalbek marveled at the huge stone lying in the quarry about 800 meters from the temple, the famous Hajar al-Habla, or Stone of the Pregnant Woman, a partially cut limestone block of enormous size. It measures approximately 20.7 by 4.8 by 4.2 meters and weighs around 1,200 tons. It was long assumed to be the largest stone ever quarried by the ancients, yet apparently abandoned in place, perhaps due to a flaw or simply because it proved too heavy to move. However, a joint team from the DAI and Lebanese University, led by Dr. Janine Abdul Mashih, re-examined the quarry, and beneath the known block, they unearthed an even larger monolith. This newly revealed stone, still attached to bedrock at its base, is estimated at 19.6 by 6 by 5.5 meters in dimensions, yielding a weight of about 1,650 tons. It appears to have been fully cut and dressed on its top and sides, ready to be extracted. Its discovery was astounding. It is the largest known worked stone from antiquity. The fact that it matches the trilithon stones used in the temple podium suggests it was intended as another course for the platform, or as a replacement if one broke. Why was this giant left behind? The German archaeologist Dr. Marguerite von Ees explained that much investigations were aimed in part at solving this mystery: how the Romans transported the 3 megaliths that were used, and why 2 others remained in the quarry. One clue is that the pregnant woman's stone has a noticeable crack, which would have compromised its integrity during lifting or dragging. Ancient engineers may have detected this crack and prudently decided to leave the block rather than risk it splitting. The newly found block, however, seems of good quality, raising more questions. Perhaps, as some speculate, the project was halted due to the outbreak of war or financial woes in the 3rd century, before that 4th block could be extracted and moved. Or possibly, it was simply too heavy for the equipment of the day, and they opted to use smaller blocks for the rest of the podium. Whatever the case, this find has renewed interest in the quarry operations and capabilities of Baalbek's builders. Today, Baalbek is not only an archaeological park, but also a venue for cultural events, such as the annual Baalbek International Festival, which since the mid-20th century has brought music and art performances into the dramatic backdrop of the Roman ruins. Standing in the Great Court on a summer night, one can look up at the moon silhouetting those 6 giant columns of Jupiter's temple, the valiant sentinels that have braved every storm and every earthquake through the ages. The atmosphere is almost magical. It's easy to understand why Baalbek has inspired so much wonder and speculation. In the following sections, we will delve into the myriad of theories and explanations that have been proposed for Baalbek's most perplexing aspects. How could ancient people quarry, transport, and lift such gargantuan stones? Who built the earliest portions of the site? Was it truly the Romans, or might they have built atop something far older? We will examine the evidence and arguments from rigorous engineering analyses to wild imaginative conjectures, each attempting to unravel Baalbek's enigma. Chapter 3: Theories and Explanations for Baalbek's Megaliths. The enduring mystery of Baalbek revolves largely around its megalithic stones, especially the 3 colossal blocks in the Temple of Jupiter's foundation, and the even larger monoliths left in the quarry. Over time, a spectrum of theories has emerged to explain who built the massive platform and how they managed it. These theories can be broadly categorized into mainstream archaeological explanations, alternative hypotheses of varying plausibility, and outright fringe or mythic accounts. In this section, we present each major theory, exploring its rationale and evidence. Mainstream explanation. In the eyes of modern archaeology and engineering, the credit for building Baalbek's megalithic terrace and temples goes unequivocally to the architects and engineers of the Roman Empire. Mainstream scholars assert that the massive platform was constructed as the foundation for the Temple of Jupiter during the Roman period, no earlier than the 1st century BCE, and that its gigantic blocks, while unusual, can be explained by the capabilities of Roman technology, harnessed with sufficient manpower and ingenuity. Let us outline how the Romans are believed to have accomplished this marvel, and what evidence supports this view. First, the archaeological context firmly places the podium in temples in the Roman era. The style of carving, the mason's marks on some stones, the decorative motifs, and the integration of the podium with the temple all align with Roman work. As Dr. Marguerite von Ees points out, the Temple of Jupiter was definitely built by Romans in at least 4 phases between around 15 BC and the early 3rd century AD. Roman coins and inscriptions found at the site, though they frustratingly do not mention the construction, nonetheless show images of the temple and name Heliopolis, confirming its prominence in the Roman period. Importantly, in the 1930s excavation under the podium, a broken piece of a Roman column drum was found embedded in the foundation fill. This indicates the great platform was built contemporaneously with or after the main temple, since a piece of the temple's own material was in its base, not in some far earlier age. In short, everything visible corresponds to Roman imperial style, and there is no tangible evidence of an earlier megalithic structure preceding it. So, assuming the Romans did it, how did they do it? Moving and lifting 800-ton stones seems beyond the normal scale of Roman construction. Yet, the Romans were unparalleled engineers for their time, and they did have experience with large monoliths elsewhere, though not quite as large. The builders of Baalbek likely employed a combination of well-known ancient techniques on an unprecedented scale. One key method was the use of earth ramps and sledges to transport monoliths. Roman engineers would quarry a stone by cutting it free on all sides but one. Then, once ready, pry or fracture the base to detach it. At Baalbek, analysis shows the limestone blocks were cut along natural horizontal bedding planes in the rock, essentially splitting layers of the quarry hill, much as was done in other Roman projects. For example, the quarry blocks for the Pont du Gard in Gaul. Ancient chiseling marks and even some curious circular indentations in the quarry have been noted. One scholar, Frederick Raget, hypothesized that these could be evidence of some form of primitive quarrying machine that helped free the blocks by creating concentric stress fractures. More concretely, the sides of the huge blocks were undercut using metal picks and possibly wooden wedges that were soaked to swell and crack the stone from below. The unfinished monoliths still attached to bedrock illustrate this process in mid-step. Once a block was fully detached, it would be lowered or slid onto a prepared surface. Moving such weight required reducing friction. The likely approach was to place the block on a massive wooden sledge and use a series of rollers underneath. Cylindrical logs, maybe as thick as telephone poles, which could roll over a compacted path. As the block on its sledge was pulled forward, workers could continuously take the rollers from behind and relate them to the front, a technique depicted in some Egyptian and Assyrian reliefs for moving colossal statues. The terrain from Baalbek's quarry to the temple is slightly downhill in parts and relatively gentle in slope, but not entirely flat. Thus, the Romans may have had to grade a road or ramp, perhaps a wide earthen causeway, to ensure a smooth journey from the quarry to the construction site. If a natural incline existed, they might have used it to their advantage to carefully let the block slide downhill, with ropes acting as brakes. However, any uphill or leveling sections would require tremendous pull force. For pulling, the Romans could deploy human muscles, draft animals, and mechanical winches. A common device was the capstan, a large vertical drum around which ropes are wound. Dozens of soldiers or slaves pushing the capstan bars can generate a powerful continuous hull. Capstans, essentially a man-powered winch, might have been anchored along the route, repulling the sled in stages. Another device was the windlass, or compound pulley system. By the late Roman period, complex pulley rigs existed. To lift the 327-ton obelisk in Rome in 1586, the Renaissance architect Domenico Fontana famously used 40 windlasses with 800 men and 140 horses to slowly hoist it upright. That gives a sense of scale. 800 men to move 324 tons with advanced pulleys. For Baalbek's 800 to 1,000 ton stones, calculations may vary, but one 19th century engineer estimated it might require 40,000 men pulling ropes to drag a 1,000-ton block on rollers. which is practically impossible to arrange in one straight pole. The Romans likely solved this by fractionating the labor, pulling with smaller teams in coordinated fashion via capstans, and by perhaps never fully lifting the stones, but rather leveraging them into place gradually. Lifting the blocks into position on the podium was arguably even more challenging than moving them horizontally. The trilithon block sits about 7 meters 23 feet above ground level, atop several lower courses of heavy but smaller stones. How to raise an 800-ton block to that height? One plausible method is often called levers in incremental elevation, or the sand and rubble packing method. Essentially, the builders could have constructed a ramp or embankment to the height of the wall, drag the block up the ramp to its intended location, then remove the ramp. Raggett suggests the Roman may have completely buried the wall in progress in a sloping earthen ramp, allowing them to slide the megalith into place and then excavate the soil away afterward. This bury and re-excavate method means they wouldn't have needed to lift the stone with cranes at all. Gravity and human or animal drag power would do most of the work going up a gentle incline. Another approach would be to use massive cranes or lifting framework. The Romans did possess large treadwheel cranes capable of lifting perhaps up to 20 to 30 tons in ideal conditions, but no ancient crane could lift hundreds of tons directly. Instead, if they needed to edge a block up, they might use a system of levers, jacks, and counterweights. For instance, they might lever up one end of the block a few inches, pack timber under it, then lever the other end, gradually rocking it upward in a seesaw fashion, building cribbing underneath until at the desired height. There are speculative reconstructions involving multiple capstans and pulley gangs raising one side of a block at a time. Given the danger and complexity, the ramp method seems more plausible. The mainstream view holds that none of this was beyond Roman capability. It was just at the extreme upper limit. The evidence favoring the Romans include the discovery of a carved stone block on the podium's surface, depicting the temple's pediment in plan. Essentially, the builders sketched out the temple design on the platform as they were constructing it. This engraving strongly ties the platform construction to the Roman temple project. The platform was not an earlier foundation. It was being built in coordination with the temple above. At the same time, traces of apparent trial and error are evident. The outer podium wall with the trilithon was left somewhat incomplete. After placing the 3 giant stones, they didn't finish the course on the southern side, as if abandoning the effort midway. In the presence of an unused 1,200-ton block in the quarry with a crack implies a failed attempt. Perhaps they planned a 4th megalith, but it cracked, so they stopped, using a smaller stone to finish the wall. These humanizing quirks align with the notion of Roman engineers pushing their techniques to the limit, sometimes overreaching. Finally, mainstream researchers point out that while the trilithon stones are extraordinary, other ancient cultures have moved large stones too, just not as large. For example, 1,000-ton obelisks in Egypt were quarried, One unfinished obelisk around 1,168 tons remain in Aswan, though never moved, and enormous stone transport occurred in late antiquity, like the 10th century moving of 600-ton statue in Egypt. The Romans themselves moved the 450-ton trilithon block successfully, demonstrating it was within their means. Thus, there is no need to invoke extinct super technologies or non-human intervention. The mainstream view acknowledges mysteries. The exact methods aren't documented, but attributes Baalbek's construction to a mix of known Roman engineering and extreme manpower, enabled by the centralized resources of the empire. As Del Upton noted, lacking concrete information, Baalbek invites imaginative stories, but Occam's razor favors the Romans. The civilization we knew was present and capable, as the authors of Baalbek's greatness. That said, even mainstream archaeologists remain curious why the Romans chose to use such oversized stones. Van Ace remarks that Baalbek's blocks are bigger than they need to be, far larger than any practical structural requirement. Perhaps it was simply a display of monumental pride, an arms race with the legacy of the pharaohs. One scholar speculated it might be due to a local building tradition. A late author claimed Phoenician temples had to have only 3 courses of stones, thus necessitating enormous blocks for tall podiums. While that explanation rings hollow to some, it could hint that the builders were consciously evoking an archaic Cyclopean style to awe onlookers. Whatever the motivation, mainstream science sees Baalbek as a pinnacle of human engineering of the ancient world, albeit one shrouded in the lost knowledge of its builders. Phoenician or pre-Roman hypothesis. A set of theories proposes that the massive stone foundations of Baalbek significantly predates the Roman temple. It may have been the work of earlier civilizations, such as the Phoenicians, Persians, or other Near Eastern people, upon which the Romans later built. This hypothesis arises partly from the silence of Roman records about Baalbek's construction, and partly from the notion that indigenous cultures might have laid a megalithic groundwork for their own reasons. Could it be that the Romans found an existing Cyclopean platform of Baal or another deity, and merely added the classical temples atop it? Or less extremely, perhaps the Romans initiated the Great Platform under Harold the Great, or local Syrian kings allied to Rome, making it a pre-Augustan or Herodian project that later Roman emperors completed. Let's examine the reasoning and evidence behind a pre-Roman Baalbek. The lack of historical mention of building the Baalbek temples is indeed perplexing. Roman historians like Pliny the Elder, Strabo, or Dio Cassius, who often praised major building feats, said little to nothing about how Heliopolis' temples came to be. Some chroniclers centuries later attributed the complex to various emperors. Coins suggest Septimius Severus or Antonius Pius, for example, but contemporary sources are mute. This vacuum has led some to speculate that when the Romans arrived, a grand platform was already partly there, perhaps begun by the last of the Seleucid kings, or the Etrurian dynasty, or other local rulers, and the Romans simply incorporated it. One notable variant of this theory involves the biblical King Solomon. While clearly legendary, there was a medieval belief that Baalbek's foundations were actually built by Solomon or his workers around 950 BCE, when Solomon was said to have built cities in Lebanon. The rationale was that the Bible mentions Solomon fortifying Baalath in Lebanon, 1 Kings 9:17-18, which some later writers conflated with Baalbek. If Solomon or locals in that era did something at Baalbek, it would push the megalithic structure back a millennium before the Romans. However, archaeologists have not found Iron Age remains to support a major 10th century BC construction. This idea survives mainly in folklore and fringe conjecture. Another possibility is a Persian or Hellenistic origin. The Achaemenids, Persians from 539 to 330 BCE, controlled Phoenicia, but are not known for megalithic architectures in this region. The Hellenistic dynasties, Ptolemies and Seleucids, did erect large temples. For instance, the Seleucids built a huge temple at Jerusalem, later rededicated by Herod. The Livius Historical Database notes that Ptolemaic rulers may have started the construction of the platform where Jupiter's temple would later sit. If true, a Ptolemaic 3rd century BCE massive foundation is essentially a pre-Roman platform. Perhaps they started leveling the top of the hill and even quarrying blocks, but never finished. Work then resumed with gusto under the Romans a few decades later. This scenario could explain why the project seems so monumental. It was a multi-generational endeavor, transcending one empire. Supporters of a pre-Roman hypothesis also points to certain stylistic differences in the masonry. They note that the trilithon stone and the course beneath them have a slightly different finish than the smaller Roman ashlar blocks above. The trilithon faces were left rough and protruding, perhaps to be carved later but never done. Some suggest this rusticated look is reminiscent of early Phoenician or even Mycenaean Cyclopean masonry styles rather than typical Roman ashlar. Additionally, Frederic Raget, an archaeological historian, argued that the decision to use only 3 huge stones for an entire course might reflect an ancient Phoenician building tradition, that podiums should not have more than 3 courses. If local builders advised the Romans or their predecessor that this is how our forefathers built temples, with 3 giant layers, it could have influenced the design. While there is no direct evidence of this rule in Phoenician architecture, Raget was searching for some cultural rationale behind the oversized blocks. During the 19th century, some European savants, upon seeing Baalbek, were convinced it must predate the Romans. For example, in 1851, a French scholar, Louis Félicien de Saussy, visited and became convinced that the podium walls were the remains of pre-Roman temple. He and others noted how different gigantic lower stones looked from the finely detailed Roman work above, and surmised an older structure lay underneath the Roman Jupiter temple. The German expedition in the early 1900s explored this question and concluded that the trilithon and podium were integrated with the Roman plan, especially after finding the engraved pediment drawing on the platform surface. However, tantalizing hints of earlier constructions have emerged. For instance, under the Roman hexagonal court, excavators reportedly found remains of a prior enclosure, perhaps a wall temenos from the Bronze Age or Persian period. One pre-Roman hypothesis posits a tell Baalbek beneath the stone courts, essentially that the Romans built their vast temple on top of an ancient mound containing earlier temples, altars, and settlements. If we could dig under the Jupiter temple, which is not feasible without dismantling the ruin, we might find foundations of a Phoenician temple of Baal, or at least an earlier platform of rough stones. The Zachariah Sitchin Index article, which actually draws on Andrew Collins' research, mentions that by the late Bronze Age, a raised courtyard and gateway existed, and that Baalbek had a renewed oracle even before the Roman buildings. It even claims that in local legend, the site was fortified by Solomon around 970 BC, referencing the biblical passages. While these claims intertwine legend and speculation, they underscore the idea that Baalbek's great sanctity was acknowledged well before Rome, which suggests someone earlier might have built grand structures there. From a structural standpoint, could earlier people have managed the big stones? The Phoenicians and their neighbors did create some large stoneworks. For instance, parts of Jerusalem's Temple Mount have Herodian stones up to around 500 tons. Some Hittite and Egyptian works also involve multi-hundred-ton stones. If we entertain that the trilithon is not Roman, then perhaps it was a local late Bronze Age or early Iron Age megalithic sanctuary that the Romans marveled at and reused. Proponents of this view sometimes romanticized an advanced Phoenician technology or cite the mysterious platform of Nimrod scenario, Nimrod being the biblical king who in legend had giants build the Tower of Babel. Some legends conflate Babel with Baalbek. However, mainstream archaeology has not validated a clearly pre-Roman date. All radiocarbon, pottery, epigraphic context points to the early century AD for actual construction. Therefore, the Phoenician origin idea remains an intriguing but unproven hypothesis. It persists partly due to national and regional pride as well. Some Lebanese and Arab historians like to think their ancestors, not foreign Romans, were responsible for Baalbek's wonders. In summary, the pre-Roman theory suggests that Baalbek's megastructures might be a palimpsest. Perhaps the massive stones were cut and moved by an earlier forgotten culture, be it Phoenician, Mythic Atlantean, or even antediluvian giants, depending on who you ask, and later civilizations simply built atop them. The Romans could then have augmented and finished the temple. This theory appeals to those who find it hard to believe the Romans would go to such lengths and then not record it. Yet, absent concrete evidence, academic consensus still attributes the trilithon to the Roman construction phases, acknowledging at most a possible Hellenistic groundwork. The mystery lingers, however, and it keeps alive questions about Baalbek's true genesis. Giants and Nephilim, legends of Titan builders. Among the more fanciful and oldest explanations for Baalbek's creation is that it was built by giants, literally a race of giant humans in the distant past, often associated with the biblical Nephilim or other mythic titans. This theory doesn't come from modern scientists, of course, but from ancient and medieval folklore, attempting to rationalize the seemingly superhuman scale of the ruins. Still, it has endured in popular imagination and has even been revived by some French theorists today, so it merits exploration. The idea of giants building Baalbek appear in various cultural traditions. As noted earlier, local Lebanese Christian lore, recorded by Patriarch Daurihi in 1705, claimed Cain's offspring and other pre-flood giants constructed Baalbek. In that story, Cain, cursed and banished, found refuge in Baalbek and built a mighty fortress city with the help of giant descendants. These giants were later wiped out by Noah's flood as punishment for their sins. The immense stones left at Baalbek were thus remnants of that antediluvian age. The specificity year 133 of the creation gives it a pseudo-historical flair. Another legend ties Baalbek to the Nephilim proper, the offspring of sons God and daughters of men mentioned in Genesis 6. Some apocryphal texts, like the Book of Enoch, describe these Nephilim as giant beings with great knowledge, who perished in the flood. In French circles, it's speculated that Nephilim might have been responsible for various megalithic sites. Baalbek, with its gargantuan stones, is often cited as a likely Nephilim construction, since normal humans supposedly couldn't manage it. Under this narrative, the Great Flood destroyed the civilization of the Nephilim in the temple, leaving only massive foundations for later people to find. Linked to the giant narrative is the figure of Nimrod, the mighty hunter and king mentioned in Genesis, great-grandson of Noah. Middle Eastern tradition sometimes identifies Nimrod as the builder of the Tower of Babel. Some legends conflate the Tower of Babel with Baalbek, claiming Nimrod ordered giants to build Baalbek as a great tower or fortress, which after the flood became known as Babel. A common thread is that the project was halted by divine intervention, the confusion of tongues at Babel or the flood, leaving Baalbek incomplete with stones still in the quarry. In all these giant narratives, the core premise is that no ordinary human could have moved such stones. Therefore, a race of giants or supernaturally empowered beings must have done it. It's essentially a pre-scientific attempt to explain engineering marvels by attributing them to larger-than-life figures, much like the Greeks thought Cyclops built the Mycenaean Wall. And indeed, one historical curator at Baalbek, Michel Alouf, noted that ignorant folks believed the trilithon was built by superhuman giants of a bygone age, a belief perhaps born out of genuine incredulity. Modern researchers obviously don't give literal credence to flesh-and-blood giants building Baalbek, as no evidence of a giant race exists. However, some French authors theorize that perhaps there were humans of exceptional stature or strength involved. The Bible does describe giants. The tallest, Goliath, was only around 9 feet per the text, but certainly not 70-foot-tall titans that would make stone lifting trivial. Interestingly, the persistence of the giant theory is such that even in recent years it resurfaces in pseudo-archaeology discussions. On the internet and social media, one often sees claims that the megalithic stones at Baalbek are proof of giants, or that skeletons of giants should be found nearby. Some fringe videos and articles conflate Nephilim narratives with Baalbek, citing how its name and feats align with stories from the Book of Enoch. From an academic perspective, giant builder myths are valuable not as factual accounts, but as cultural folklore reflecting the awe Baalbek inspired. When Scotsman David Urquhart visited in 1860, he wrote that the stones shut out every other thought and troubled the mind with riddles. He ended up proposing his own giant theory that perhaps contemporaries of Noah built the temple with pre-flood know-how, and that they used mastodons, prehistoric elephants, to transport stones. Urquhart actually speculated mastodons, though apparently he didn't explicitly mention them in the diary fragments. Baalbek taxed the imagination so much that even learned people flirted with outlandish ideas. In the scheme of theories, the giants Nephilim hypothesis overlaps with both the religious mythos and sometimes ancient astronaut theories. Some say the giants were actually extraterrestrials or their hybrid offspring, but that transitions into alien territory. Pure giant theorists basically hold that an advanced pre-flood human or hybrid species with immense strength and stature physically built Baalbek using either brute force or possibly forgotten technology. It's a view found in fringe books in some creationist circles to demonstrate how pre-flood civilizations could do big things. Needless to say, mainstream science finds no evidence of giant humanoids in the archaeological record at Baalbek or anywhere else beyond normal human ranges. The stones show signatures of typical stone-cutting techniques by humans of ordinary size. But the appeal of giants persists as a romantic or sensational explanation. It provides a straightforward answer for laypeople. Giants did it, requiring no machinery or technical nuance. While giants and Nephilim make for colorful storytelling, they remain in the realm of legend, not evidence-based history. Baalbek's giant builder myths, from Cain's cursed crew to Nimrod's titans and Solomon's jinn laborers, are a fascinating part of the site's lore, reflecting human tendency to fill gaps in knowledge with epic narratives. They highlight just how unbelievable Baalbek's scale was to those who encountered it, without the benefit of modern engineering understanding. Next, we'll shift from mythical beings to other speculative builders, notably theories involving not giants of Earth, but perhaps visitors from the stars. Ancient aliens, the extraterrestrial theory. Another high-profile fringe theory proposes that Baalbek's platform was not built by humans alone, but rather with the assistance or outright construction by extraterrestrial visitors in antiquity, the so-called ancient astronauts. This idea was popularized in the second half of the 20th century by writers by Erich von Däniken and Zachariah Sitchin, and it has since become a staple on TV shows like Ancient Aliens. The core claim is that the megalithic stones of Baalbek were far beyond the capability of ancient people, so they must have been created using advanced technology, possibly as part of an alien base or landing site. One specific version advocated by Zachariah Sitchin in his book The Stairway to Heaven, 1980, is particularly famous. Sitchin wrote that the great platform of Baalbek was actually a landing site, and launch pad for extraterrestrial spacecraft. According to Sitchin's interpretation of Sumerian and Babylonian texts, which mainstream scholars dispute, the Epic of Gilgamesh and other myths encode references to Baalbek as a place where sky gods touch down. Sitchin argued that the colossal paved stone surface would be an ideal foundation for heavy rocket ships to land on, robust and enduring. He even alluded that Gilgamesh, the hero of the Mesopotamian epic, traveled to Baalbek, which he equated with the site of the gods on his quest for immortality. Indeed, Sitchin claimed that in the distant past, perhaps around 10,000 BC or earlier, alien Anunnaki from a planet called Nibiru established Baalbek as a base of operations on Earth, a kind of fortified airport. From here, in this narrative, they launched craft carrying minerals and supplies. The massive stones were needed to support the weight of their ships or create a durable platform that wouldn't be damaged by rocket thrust. This cosmic interpretation reimagines Baalbek not as a temple foundation, but as an otherworldly piece of infrastructure. Erich von Daniken, in his seminal 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods, also highlighted Baalbek. He marveled at the trilithon blocks and suggested that since we can hardly imagine primitive people moving them, perhaps extraterrestrials used some form of anti-gravity or advanced machinery to put them in place. Von Daniken asked rhetorically if Baalbek's flat top could have been an ancient launch or landing platform, essentially similar to Sitchin's later claim, though von Daniken was less specific about texts and more about the visual impression. Why do aliens get invoked for Baalbek? The primary reason is the extreme weight of the blocks and the lack of documented construction methods. For those inclined to think humans couldn't do it, aliens become the handy solution. Beings with superior technology, like gravitational manipulation, giant anti-gravity crane, or even direct levitation, could easily quarry and arrange multi-thousand-ton rocks like children playing with Legos. This line of reasoning finds it more plausible that spacefarers helped or directed the project than that Romans or their predecessors did it with rope or manpower. Some evidence cited by ancient alien proponents include the precision of stone placements. Supposedly not even a needle can fit between the trilithon joints, which indeed are extremely tight. The idea that the site is uniquely large compared to any similar structures, hence not a normal human endeavor, but a one-off alien artifact. And any local legends that speak of gods or flying objects, interpreted as UFOs. It's worth noting that Baalbek's alien theory often intersect with the giant theory. Some propose that aliens were the giants or that aliens used genetically engineered giants as their labor force. But focusing on the straight extraterrestrial hypothesis, the image of Baalbek as a spaceport is a dramatic one. Sitchin even illustrated in his book how the rocket ship might stand on the platform. He claimed support from texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh and some apocryphal writings that mention a cedar mountain or landing place in Lebanon. In reality, Epic of Gilgamesh does mention a cedar forest and landing of the gods in the far west, which some creative readers link to Baalbek, but mainstream views that as mythical and not specific. Supporters sometimes point to anonymous marks or supposed high-tech traces on the stones. For instance, Brian Forster and others in the Lost Technology camp, which overlaps with ancient aliens, note odd tool marks on some megaliths or on granite pieces at the site, suggesting to them machinery beyond Roman abilities. While such marks likely have mundane explanations, quarrying methods, or later modifications, they feed speculation that perhaps power tools or energy beams were used by aliens. Mainstream scientists reject the alien hypothesis on multiple grounds. There's no actual evidence of advanced machinery or metals at Baalbek, no remnants of alien technology, and the site is clearly embedded in Roman architectural context. Why would aliens need Corinthian capitals and Roman ornamentation? Also, logically, if aliens could travel light years, why would they build a stone launch or landing pad? Couldn't they hover or use any location as a base? The notion of an interplanetary craft needing a specific stone runway seems anthropomorphic. Nonetheless, the ancient astronaut theory remains one of the more famous for Baalbek in popular culture. Even the travel guides often mention, half jokingly, some people think aliens built it. The ancient alien theory casts Baalbek as possibly extraterrestrial project, either built by aliens to serve their own purposes, or built by humans under alien guidance. Proponents might cite the sheer difficulty of moving 1,000-ton stones as their main evidence. Combined with their own rereadings of mythical texts, it's a speculative leap that lies outside evidence-based history, but it has certainly captured imagination. Moving from space back to Earth, there is another category of explanations that doesn't involve extraterrestrials, but rather posits a lost human civilization with advanced technology, a kind of Atlantis on land, which we will explore next. Lost advanced civilization and high technology. Parallel to the ancient alien hypothesis, but staying terrestrial, is the theory that Baalbek was constructed by a highly advanced human civilization that has since been lost to history. In this view, some ancient society, perhaps predating known civilizations, possessed extraordinary technology or engineering knowledge, enabling them to move and manipulate gigantic stones with ease. This could be an Atlantean civilization or pre-Ice Age culture, or simply an earlier advanced phase of the Phoenicians or Egyptians that mainstream history doesn't acknowledge. Unlike the alien theory, this proposes it was humans or humanoids who achieved Baalbek's feat, but using lost technology that far exceeded what the Romans had. One vocal proponent of this line of thought is researcher Brian Forster, whose work focuses on megalithic sites around the world. Forster and others in the alternative archaeology community argue that there are telltale signs at Baalbek of machining and construction techniques beyond the Roman kin. For example, Forster points out what he interprets as evidence of saw cuts in hard granite stone blocks found at Baalbek. He notes that some red granite pieces, possibly column shafts or ornamentation, have cut marks that resemble those found in Egypt at pre-dynastic sites, which he believes indicate the use of large circular saws or power tools. The Romans, according to standard history, did not have mechanical stone saws for such hard granite. They used hand tools and abrasive cord saws. Thus, Forster suggests these marks imply that an earlier high-tech culture one that had advanced lathes or saws cut these stones. In short, that Romans built on top of something older and more advanced. Another piece of evidence cited by lost civilization theorists is the differing weathering of stones at Baalbek. Forster notes that the huge base blocks in some of the underground tunnels or lower levels appear far more eroded than the smaller blocks above. To him, this indicates those base megaliths are much older than the Roman period, maybe thousands of years older, and have been weathered by the elements before the Romans came and built new structures atop them. In this narrative, the Romans found a megalithic foundation from a prior civilization and decided to reuse it for their temple of Jupiter. This resonates with Louis de Saucy's 1850 observation we mentioned earlier, concluding the megalithic podium was pre-Roman. But Forster extends it to say the earlier civilization was likely one with higher capabilities. Hidden within these stones, alternative researchers claim, are clues of precision. For example, the trilithon blocks are so neatly joined with such precision that not even a needle can fit between them, as one account put it, that they suspect advanced planning or even prefabrication was at play. The argument is that normal ancient stonemasons couldn't achieve such perfect joints on 1,000-ton stones without modern-like surveying equipment or cutting tools. Additionally, the sheer idea of organizing tens of thousands of workers to move these stones is seen as impractical by these theorists, so they lean towards some form of forgotten technology, such as sound levitation, anti-gravity, or extremely sophisticated cranes, which the supposed lost civilization had mastered. Indeed, some French theorists suggest ancient people knew how to use resonant acoustics or other physics tricks to make stones weightless, an idea particularly popular in esoteric circles. The timeline proposed by lost civilization theorists often predate the known Bronze Age. Some suggest Baalbek's platform might date to around 10,000 BC or earlier, aligning it with conjectured timelines for Atlantis or other early advanced cultures. Historic Mysteries notes that some people believe the site dates back as far as 9,000 years ago, which would be around 7,000 BC, well before any known megalithic building tradition. If true, that would challenge not only biblical chronology, but also conventional archaeology, which dates large-scale stone architecture to no earlier than about 4,000 to 3,000 BC at places like Stonehenge or the Egyptian pyramids. The assertion is that evidence of a 9,000-plus-year-old Baalbek would require rewriting history, which is exactly what these theorists seek. A narrative tying many threads together suggests a grand scenario. Before the flood, or the end of the last ice age, a highly advanced civilization existed that constructed megalithic sites around the world: Baalbek, Giza, Pumapunku, possibly with the help of knowledge from fallen angels or aliens, depending on the theory. The civilization was destroyed by a cataclysm, but their constructions, being stone, survived. Later cultures found these ruins and often repurposed them. In Baalbek's case, maybe the local people of the Bronze Age found an ancient stone platform in the Bekaa Valley and used it as a base of worship for Baal, which later the Romans monumentalized with their own additions. Lost civilization proponents will sometimes attempt to show that even with all modern knowledge, we might struggle to replicate Baalbek's feat today, which in their mind supports the idea that the builders had something special. In truth, modern heavy lifting equipment could move 1,000-ton objects. It's been done for things like moving large rock pieces or even structures, but it's a massive effort, though arguably no one tries because there's no need to build in stones at that scale now. Critics of this theory argue that it undermines ancient people and leaps to fantastical conclusions when simpler ones suffice. There's also a lack of any artifact or record of an advanced lost civilization. No metal tools or machinery remnants at Baalbek that would suggest high technology. If saw-cut granite is there, mainstream will likely say maybe those pieces were cut in post-Roman times or are misidentified. The presence of granite column is interesting. They did bring granite from Aswan, as noted by Livius. Justinians took granite columns to Constantinople. Granite was worked by Romans using abrasives and manpower. Alternative folks think the marks look like machine work, so it's contested interpretation. One could say the lost civilization theory is a human-centric alternative to invoking aliens. It still denies that known historical cultures like Rome did the work, but credits unknown humans instead. This often ties to a broader narrative that there was an Ice Age or pre-Ice Age global civilization that influenced later known ones. The lost advanced civilization theory for Baalbek holds that the key to the mystery lies not in Roman imperial age but far earlier, with a culture that had both the knowledge and perhaps motivation to build a giant stone platform. The Romans then just built on these remnants. This theory seeks patterns between global megaliths and often claims mainstream archaeology is unwilling to connect those dots. It's important, however, to differentiate evidence-based reasoning from speculations. As of now, no direct evidence, like carbon-datable organic material from mortar or context, places Baalbek stones before Roman times. On the contrary, excavations from Roman coins and pottery in the construction backfill. But the conversation remains open due to the genuine anomaly that Baalbek represents in terms of scale. It's an anomaly that invites extraordinary explanation. Having surveyed the mainstream and alternate theories, from Roman engineers to giants, aliens, and lost advanced humans, we can see that Baalbek serves as a sort of Rorschach test. People project onto it their ideas of history and prehistory, either a testament to Roman ambition and ability, or a remnant of something far older and more mysterious. Other esoteric and local legends. Beyond the major categories above, Baalbek has inspired a variety of other esoteric, religious, and local folkloric explanations that don't neatly fall under giants or aliens, but are worth noting. They often intertwine with the broader theories, but have their own flavor. Solomon and the Jinn. While we mention Solomon under the giant section, it's more accurately a legend of magic rather than giant strength. In Islamic folklore, Solomon was given command over the winds, animals, and spirit or jinn. So one story holds that Solomon wanted to build a palace at Baalbek for the Queen of Sheba. He commanded the jinn to carry and position the stones. The fact that blocks were left in the quarry is explained by Solomon's death or a dispute causing the jinn laborers to cease work. Some versions say the name Baalbek comes from Baal, Lord, and Bek, Beka or deity's name, but folk etymology sometimes links it to Baalbek. While not historically credible, the Solomon legend reflects how later monotheistic cultures tried to fit Baalbek into their worldview, attributing it to famous figures rather than pagan Romans. It's an example of integration into Abrahamic myth, astrological or celestial purpose. Some esoteric theories proposed that Baalbek's layout had to do with celestial observation or energy. Andrew Collins mused that the high elevation of the platform might mean it was some kind of platform for the observation of celestial and stellar events. While mainstream doesn't see an obvious astronomical alignment beyond typical east-west orientation of the temple, French thinkers often check if megalithic sites align with solstice or star risings. It's not widely claimed that Baalbek is an ancient observatory, but it's an idea floated in passing. Energy vortex or earth grid. In some New Age circles, Baalbek might be considered a node in the global energy grid or ley lines. Because it is ancient and powerful, some might claim it sits on a confluence of telluric energies, or was deliberately placed at geomantic hotspots by ancient sages. This is more speculative mysticism than a concrete theory, but one does see all major megalithic sites drawn into such theories. Baalbek accumulates a legendarium that ranges from biblical to folkloric to science fiction. Each era and group seems to cast Baalbek in their own image. To Roman Christians, it became a fortress of martyr or a defiled pagan haunt. To Arab Muslims, it became a wonder of Solomon or Nimrod. To European romantics, it was a riddle of titanic builders. To New Age thinkers, it's an ancient puzzle hinting at a forgotten wisdom or visitors. What all these esoteric and local legends have in common is an attempt to make sense of Baalbek's greatness by fitting it into a larger cosmology or narrative. Whether that narrative is religious, mythic, or pseudoscientific, it shows that Baalbek inspires more than just historical curiosity. It touches on humanity's desire to connect with something greater, be it gods or the universe. To close this section, we should emphasize that modern archaeology strongly supports the view that Baalbek's main structures were erected by humans in the Roman era. Yet the persistence of alternative theories reminds us that certain achievements of antiquity still feel almost miraculous to us today. Baalbek's enigma is part of its allure. It spurs us to imagine giants walking the earth, or aliens descending from the sky, or Golden Age civilizations with abilities far beyond our expectations of the ancient world. Having journeyed through history, myth, and speculation, we can better appreciate Baalbek in all its facets as a real place of stone and engineering, and as a mythical symbol of the extraordinary. In our final thoughts, we return to the real Baalbek, what remains today, and what ongoing research may yet reveal. Chapter 4, Conclusion. Baalbek endures as a place where history and legend intertwine, perched between the factual and the fantastical. On one hand, we have the tangible reality, towering colonnades and ornate capitals lying in ruins, Latin inscription and Roman coins testifying to to a flourishing city of Jupiter. Archaeological surveys mapping out courtyards, altars, and underground vaults built by known hands. We can stand on the weathered limestone blocks and know that 2,000 years ago, devotees gathered here, climbing the grand staircase to offer sacrifices under the open sky, marveling at the same monoliths that astonish us today. The Roman Empire's imprint is undeniable. From the elegant temple of Bacchus, with its carved ceiling portrait of gods, to the reused granite columns that once graced Justinian's Constantinople, modern science, through methods like laser scanning and stratigraphic excavation, has demystified many aspects, revealing how blocks were quarried along natural rock seams, how the complex expanded in phases under successive emperors, and how even the mightiest stones show human imperfections. Yet on the other hand, Baalbek's aura of mystery remains intact. It is hard to stand beneath the 6 surviving columns of the Great Temple, each nearly 70 feet high, and not feel a sense of awe that borders on disbelief. It's no wonder that for generations, people have looked up at those columns and massive platform stones and asked, who could have done this? Was it truly mere mortals? The absence of ancient records answering that question has allowed every manner of theory to flourish, turning Baalbek into a mirror reflecting humanity's own imagination. In that mirror, we see the giants of old straining at ropes. We see King Solomon commanding spirits in a whirlwind of wind and magic. We see alien craft hovering above the stone terrace, touching down amidst plumes of smoke. We see lost engineers of Atlantis with anti-gravity devices. We see mythic heroes and prophets, from Cain to Nimrod to Alexander, all leaving their ghostly fingerprints on the stones. Ultimately, Baalbek's true story is likely both prosaic and profound. Profound in that it showcases the ingenuity of ancient engineers and the heights of religious devotion. The Romans and Syrian subjects mobilized unimaginable resources to honor their syncretic god, producing a monument that outlasted their civilization. Prosaic in that if we could watch its construction, we probably see not giants or aliens, but thousands of ordinary men, architects, masons, quarrymen, sweating, shouting orders, leveraging wooden rollers and capstan, inching the great stones forward day by day. The magicians who juggled with these stones were human beings with calloused hands and remarkable skill, yet working with technologies we understand, albeit on a superhuman scale. As research continues, we may yet learn more. Perhaps future excavations with ground-penetrating radar will uncover traces of that elusive earlier shrine. Ongoing conservation efforts will stabilize the ruins, maybe even re-erect a few fallen columns one day so visitors can better imagine the past glory. Digital archaeology has already created 3D virtual reconstructions, letting us fly through a simulation of Roman Heliopolis, gazing at the 50-ton carved architraves perched atop the columns, colors restored, the temples bustling again in our minds. Each new method enriches our understanding and ability to share Baalbek's story, and yet some part of Baalbek will likely always remain an enigma. There is a poetic truth in what Del Upton observed. In absence of concrete information, Baalbek became a very accommodating screen upon which to project strikingly varied stories. These stories are now a part of Baalbek's legacy too. The stones are silent, but the myth speaks volumes about human culture, our need to attribute greatness either to the gods above or the giants before, rather than ourselves. In a sense, Baalbek challenges us to recognize the extraordinary capacity of our own species. The bewilderment it evoked in 19th century travelers perhaps says more about the loss of ancient knowledge than the presence of supernatural aid. Standing at Baalbek today, as the sun sets over the anti-Lebanon mountains and the cut stones glow golden, one can feel a connection across time. Perhaps Marcel Proust did when he immortalized Baalbek in his novel as a place of mysterious grandeur. One feels the continuity of purpose, generation after generation, recognizing this hilltop as special. The site has been a Bronze Age altar, a classical oracle, a Byzantine basilica, an Arab citadel, and now a World Heritage Site that inspires the world. Baalbek teaches humility. It reminds us that there are achievements in the past still difficult to comprehend, and that our ancestors, named or nameless, were capable of more than we often credit. In the end, whether one subscribes to the straightforward archaeological account or indulges in fantastical theories, Baalbek's impact is undeniable. It sparks questions about human history, technology, and mythology that are fundamental and exciting. The gigantic stones of Baalbek have fulfilled exactly their apparent original purpose: to dazzle and endure. They dazzled ancient pilgrims. They endured through quakes and storms. They dazzled medieval storytellers. They endured through war and neglect. And they continue to dazzle all of us who encounter them today, whether in person or through the stories they have spawned. The mystery of Baalbek is part of its majesty, and as we conclude, we acknowledge that in unraveling some threads, others remain woven in myth. Baalbek stands as a testament to the idea that some places are larger than life, built with ambition that defies limits, and generating legend that defy belief. It is, in the truest sense, a monument to human wonder, both the wonder we create and the wonder we feel.